Welcome back, seekers of wisdom, to day 27 of our 30-day Wisdom Quest Challenge. We are nearing the end of our journey together, a journey that has taken us through the highest peaks of philosophical thought and the deepest valleys of self-reflection. We have gathered a treasure trove of insights about resilience, about acceptance, about our values, about our legacy. In our last session, we explored the crucial and difficult art of integration, of bridging the gap between the wisdom we know and the life we live. This might feel like the end of the quest. It might feel as though we have finally arrived, that we have done the work and can now rest in a state of earned wisdom. But today, we must confront one of the most subtle, most seductive, and most dangerous illusions on the path of wisdom, the illusion of arrival. Imagine you have spent years of your life climbing a great and difficult mountain. You have endured storms. You have navigated treacherous cliffs. You have overcome fear and exhaustion. And finally, with a last heroic effort, you pull yourself onto the summit. You stand there, triumphant, breathing the thin, clean air, looking at the world spread out at your feet. You have done it. You have reached the peak. You have achieved mastery. But then, as the clouds of your own self-satisfaction part, you see something you did not expect. You see that your summit is just one small peak in a vast, endless mountain range, with higher, more majestic, and more mysterious peaks stretching out before you as far as the eye can see. Today, we learn that the goal of the wise person is not to conquer a single mountain, but to fall in love with the journey of climbing. We are here to explore the journey continues, lifelong learning and growth. This is a story about what happens after mastery and the profound discovery that personal development is not a destination, but an ongoing, glorious, and unending process of personal evolution. Our story begins where another left off. We return years later to the city of echoes and to Kai, the master luthier. The city was still noisy, still chaotic, but it had changed in subtle ways. Pockets of quiet thoughtfulness, small gardens of peace, had begun to appear, inspired by Kai's example. And Kai himself was a man transformed. He was no longer the volatile, reactive artisan, tormented by his spectral echo. Through years of diligent, daily practice, he had integrated its energy. He had achieved a state of profound peace and mastery. His workshop was no longer just a place where instruments were made. It was a sanctuary of calm, a place where citizens would come just to be in his serene presence. He was a master, not just of his craft, but of himself. He had, by all measures, reached the summit of the mountain he had set out to climb. But a new, subtle, and almost invisible kind of challenge had begun to take root in his life. It was the challenge of mastery itself. His practice had become comfortable. His wisdom had become familiar. He knew the answers to the questions people brought him. He was no longer a student, but a sage. And in this comfortable mastery, a quiet, almost imperceptible stagnation had begun to set in. The fire of his curiosity, the very fire that had once driven him to the silent master's tower, had cooled to a bed of warm, glowing embers. He was at peace, but his growth had plateaued. He was in danger of a new kind of trap, the trap of the finished product, the illusion that the wisdom quest was over. He had become so adept at navigating his own familiar mountain that he had forgotten the existence of the rest of the range. The inciting incident for his next great lesson was not a crisis or a failure, but the arrival of a stranger. A woman, her face weathered by a sun and a wind that were not of his land, her clothes patched from a dozen different kinds of foreign cloth, walked into his workshop one afternoon. She did not come to buy an instrument. She carried one of her own. It was an instrument unlike anything Kai or anyone in the City of Echoes had ever seen. It was a stringed instrument, yes, but its body was a large, curved, hollowed-out gourd. Its neck was long and fretless like a barren road, and its sound was strange and unsettling and achingly beautiful. The traveler sat down on a simple stool, uninvited, and began to play. The music she made followed none of the rules of harmony or melody that Kai had spent a lifetime perfecting. It was filled with microtones that slid between the notes he knew, with dissonant chords that were both jarring and beautiful with rhythms that seemed to follow the pattern of a human heartbeat or the gait of a walking animal rather than a steady, predictable metronome. It was wild, untamed, and it spoke of vast, open spaces, of unfamiliar emotions, of a world of feeling that was completely outside the well-tended garden of his own musical knowledge. It was a musical language he did not understand. As Kai listened, he felt a complex and deeply uncomfortable series of emotions. His first reaction was one of intellectual pride, a subtle but powerful defense mechanism of his ego. His mind, the mind of a master, immediately began to critique the music. It is primitive, a part of in thought. The tuning is imprecise. There is no structure, no adherence to the fundamental laws of harmony. This was the voice of his mastery, the voice of his ego, trying to protect its territory by dismissing what it did not understand. But beneath that, he felt something else, something far more powerful, a deep, profound sense of awe, and a terrifying, exhilarating feeling of his own immense ignorance. This woman's music came from a world of feeling and experience that his own perfect, harmonious instruments could not touch. Her music made his own masterpieces suddenly seem small, provincial, and beautifully, tragically incomplete. His comfortable world of mastery was shattered by a single, unfamiliar song. The embers of his curiosity had been doused with a gallon of fuel, and a new, roaring fire was beginning to burn. After she finished playing, the workshop was filled with a ringing silence. The traveler looked at Kai, her weathered eyes holding a deep, knowing wisdom. She did not ask if he liked her music. She asked a different, more penetrating question. "You have built a beautiful house," she said, gesturing to his workshop, his perfectly crafted lutes, his life's work. "Its walls are strong, and its gardens are well tended. But have you ever wondered what lies beyond your own garden walls?" The question struck Kai like a bolt of lightning. It was the very essence of his own story, the story of his own limiting beliefs, thrown back at him. He had shattered the walls of his own emotional reactivity, but had he simply built a new, more beautiful, and more comfortable garden in its place? Had he mistaken the mastery of one small plot of land for an understanding of the entire world? This was the beginning of his next great lesson, the lesson of intellectual humility. Kai, whose fame as a wise man had spread throughout the city, now felt like a novice once more. He spent days wrestling with his own ego, the part of him that was the master luthier of Sonus, the revered sage, wanted to reject the traveler's music, to find flaws in it, to defend his own tradition as superior, more refined, more evolved. It was a subtle but powerful form of resistance. He recognized the feeling. It was the same defensive, fearful energy his echo used to have, but this time it was intellectual rather than emotional. It was the ego's fear of not knowing, its terror of being seen as a beginner. To be a master is a safe and comfortable identity. To be a student is to be vulnerable, to be open to being wrong, to admit that your map of the world is, and always will be, incomplete. He meditated on this internal struggle. He applied the same principles he had learned from the silent master so many years ago. He did not fight the defensive thoughts of his ego. He did not judge them. He simply observed them. He saw his pride. He saw his fear of the unknown. He saw his attachment to his own expertise, his identity as the one who knows. And in the quiet space of that observation, he made a conscious choice. He chose growth over comfort. He chose curiosity over certainty. He chose the vulnerable, exciting path of the student. He sought out the traveler who was staying at a small inn at the edge of the city. He found her carving a small piece of wood with a delicate knife. He bowed to her, a gesture of profound respect, the bow of a student to a master. "Your music has shown me that my world is smaller than I believed," Kai said, his voice free of any pretense or authority. "I have spent my life perfecting one language, believing it to be the only one worth speaking. You have shown me that there are other languages I do not speak, other worlds I have not seen. I am a master in my own small house, but I am a child in the world. I ask that you teach me. I wish to learn the first note of your song." The traveler looked at him, her weathered face breaking into a warm, genuine smile. "The desire to learn is the only true requirement for wisdom," she said. "But first, you must understand something. Your cup is full. It is a beautiful, ornate, and precious cup, but it is full to the brim with your own beautiful music, your own perfect theories, your own hard-won mastery. If I try to pour my knowledge into your cup now, it will only spill over the sides and be wasted on the ground. Before you can learn a new song, you must first be willing to empty your cup." This was Kai's lesson in the necessity of a growth mindset. The traveler, seeing the question in his eyes, told him a story, a classic parable from her own tradition, about a learned scholar who visited a great Zen master to inquire about the nature of enlightenment. The master welcomed the scholar, and as they spoke, began to pour tea. He poured until the scholar's cup was full, and then he kept pouring, the hot tea overflowing and spilling onto the table. The scholar, alarmed, cried out, "Stop, the cup is full. No more will go in." The master stopped pouring, looked at the scholar and said, "Like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" Kai understood. To truly learn something new, he had to be willing to set aside what he already knew. He had to approach this new instrument not as a master luthier, but as a complete and utter beginner, with all the humility and openness that entailed. This was the practice of intellectual humility in action. And so, his new apprenticeship began. The traveler, whose name was Serafina, agreed to stay in Sonus for a season and teach him. The process was humbling, frustrating, and deeply transformative. The new instrument, which she called a sarod, felt alien in his master's hands. His fingers, so accustomed to the precise frets and predictable intervals of his lutes, fumbled on the long, smooth, fretless neck. The sounds he produced were not music. They were the clumsy squawks and scratches of a first-day student. He, who could make wood sing with celestial beauty, now struggled to produce a single, clear note. There were days of immense frustration. His old ego, the ghost of the master, would rise up and whisper vicious insults in his ear. "You are wasting your time. This is not for you. You sound like a dying cat. Go back to what you know. Go back to what you are good at. Protect your reputation." But Kai, using the very techniques of non-reaction he had practiced for years, would simply observe this voice without believing it. He would acknowledge the frustration, take a breath, and pick up the strange instrument again. He was applying the wisdom of emotional integration to the new challenge of intellectual growth. Through this process of clumsy, humble practice, Kai rediscovered something he had lost in the quiet comfort of his mastery: the pure, simple joy of the lifelong quest for wisdom. He found delight in being a beginner, in the struggle, in the small, incremental moments of continuous improvement. He remembered the thrill of not knowing, the excitement of a new world opening up before him. He learned that the joy of the journey was not just in reaching the summit, but in the very act of climbing and the feeling of the muscles straining, in the discovery of a new foothold in the breathtaking view from halfway up. He began to see the connections between the two musical traditions. He saw how Seraphine's fluid, emotional music could inform his own structured, harmonious compositions. He began to experiment, adding small, microtonal bends to his lute music, leaving spaces of evocative silence inspired by the traveler's phrasing. His own music began to evolve, to grow, to become something richer, more complex, and more profound than it had been before. He was not replacing his old knowledge, but integrating it with the new. His personal evolution was audible in the new, more worldly sounds coming from his workshop. He was building a new instrument, a hybrid that combined the principles of his own lutes with the principles of Seraphine's sarod. It was a physical metaphor for the integration of new knowledge. The climax of this chapter of his life was not a single event, but a final performance in the city plaza. At the end of the season, Kai and Serafina performed a duet together. Kai played his new hybrid instrument. The music they created was something entirely new, a synthesis of their two traditions, a beautiful conversation between structure and freedom, harmony and dissonance, the known and the unknown. It was a sound that captured the beauty of a wisdom quest itself, and it moved the citizens of Sonus in a way no music had before. At the end of the season, Serafina prepared to leave. On their last evening together, they sat in Kai's workshop, the familiar scent of wood and varnish mingling with the strange, earthy scent of the traveler's gourd instrument. "I have taught you what I can of my music," Serafina said. "But the real lesson was not about the notes." "I know," Kai replied. "The real lesson was about my cup and the joy of emptying it." Serafina smiled. "Yes, but there is one last thing you should know." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, beautifully crafted, but very simple lute. It was a perfect copy of one of Kai's own designs. "While I was teaching you," she said, "I was also learning. I came to this city to learn the secrets of your perfect harmony, of your disciplined craft. My music has a heart, but it lacks a spine. Yours has a spine, but I thought it could use a wilder heart. I, too, am on a wisdom quest. The master is always a student in some other school." This was Kai's final, profound epiphany. The journey truly never ended. Lifelong learning was not just a practice for novices. It was the very definition of a master. A true master was not someone who knew everything, but someone who was forever in love with the process of not knowing. The resolution of our story finds Kai years later. Serafina is long gone, a beautiful memory. But Kai's workshop is a different place. It is no longer just his private studio. It has become the Conservatory of Musical Inquiry, a place where travelers from all over the world, carrying strange and wonderful instruments, come to share their knowledge and learn from others. It is a living embodiment of lifelong learning, a place humming with the energy of curiosity. On one wall hang his perfect, familiar lutes, masterpieces of harmony and structure. On another wall hangs Seraphine's old sarod, and a dozen other instruments he has since learned to play, each one a testament to his commitment to being a beginner. The story ends with Kai, now an old man himself, his face a map as wise and weathered as Seraphine's once was. He is welcoming a new traveler, a young man carrying a complex flute made of bone. The young man plays a strange, haunting melody. Kai listens, and instead of the defensiveness of his old mastery, his face lights up with a look of pure, unadulterated, and joyful curiosity. "Wonderful," he says when the young man is finished. "I have no idea how you do that. Please, will you teach me?" He had learned the ultimate wisdom, that the quest itself is the destination, and the most beautiful music is the sound of a mind that is forever open and forever learning. The Conservatory of Musical Inquiry became more than a school. It became a living organism, an ecosystem of humility, sound, and shared searching. People from distant lands began to arrive not just to learn, but to listen. Some brought with them instruments unknown to the West. Others brought no instruments at all, only songs passed down by grandmothers, chants learned in war camps, lullabies sung to them beneath tin roofs or under vast desert skies. The conservatory became a place where stories disguised as melodies passed from stranger to stranger, like sacred relics in motion. And at the center of it all was Kai, not the hero, not the sage, just Kai, a man who had grown old with the grace of weathered wood softened, marked by time, but stronger for it. Kai no longer played to impress. In fact, he rarely performed at all. Instead, he could often be found sitting cross-legged on the floor of the main chamber, his hands resting gently on his knees, his eyes closed, not in meditation, but in communion with whatever sound was being made. Sometimes he would listen for hours without saying a word. Other times, he would pose a single question at the end of a session softly spoken, open-ended, the kind of question that took days to answer and often changed shape along the way. He had become a keeper of space, not a center of attention. His presence offered permission to experiment, to fail, to search without needing to arrive. He gave people back their ears, their courage, their curiosity. And the city changed in response. Music spilled into the streets, not just from buskers and taverns, but from citizens going about their daily lives. Street sweepers hummed in unusual time signatures. Children clapped games in 7/8 rhythm. Vendors greeted customers with a melodic phrase instead of a barked price. There was a subtle, growing understanding that music wasn't an art form confined to concert halls. It was a way of perceiving life, a way of honoring each moment with presence. But time, even for those most attuned to its passage, does not pause. Kai's body began to slow. His once sure fingers stiffened in the cold. His hearing ironically faded in certain frequencies. The city's doctors offered aids, but he declined. He said it was a gift to hear less of the noise and more of the silence between. He began passing on responsibilities, first logistical, then spiritual. A young woman named Marin, who had once arrived at the Conservatory mute and traumatized, had become one of its most vibrant stewards. She composed entire symphonies using only percussive breath and hand movement. Kai saw in her not just a student, but a future teacher whose flame was already catching. He entrusted her with the curation of the space, but more importantly, with the ethos that animated it. "You do not need to preserve what we've built," he told her one evening under the flickering lamplight. "Preservation is a form of death. You must let it evolve. Kill the things that no longer sing. Trust the pulse." Marin wept not in sorrow, but in recognition. She knew that Kai was not leaving her a legacy. He was leaving her a living rhythm. In the final months of his life, Kai became almost entirely silent. Not out of fatigue, but intention. He said that words were becoming too slow for the pace of his spirit. Instead, he communicated through gesture, through the soft tuning of a string, through the placement of a certain object in the room. Those close to him learned to read these gestures like glyphs, each one carrying a weight of meaning more elegant than speech. One day, a boy arrived at the conservatory. No one knew where he came from. His skin was sun-darkened, his eyes wide. He did not speak the language of the city, but he carried an instrument, a crude pipe made from bamboo and sinew. When he played, the sound was uneven, broken in places, but it was honest. And Kai, who had not spoken in weeks, stood up from his place by the window, crossed the room with slow, trembling steps, and sat before the boy. And then, with all the gentleness of twilight, he bowed, not as a gesture of age, but of reverence. He looked at the boy, placed his hand on his chest, and with barely a whisper, said, "Please, will you teach me?" Those standing nearby would never forget that moment. The most respected man in the city, a living legend, asking to be taught by a child. It was not theater, it was not performance. It was the culmination of a life spent in pursuit of a single truth, that the soul is most alive when it is learning. That wisdom is not a destination, but a dance between knowing and unknowing. That the world does not need more answers, it needs more people humble enough to ask. Kai passed away not long after. He died in his sleep, with the wind carrying faint melodies through the shutters of his room. By his bedside was a page from his journal, the final entry. It read only this: "There is no final note, only the next question." After his passing, the conservatory held no grand funeral, no statues or songs in his name. Instead, they held a listening ceremony. People from every part of the world gathered in silence. For an entire day, no one spoke. They simply listened. To the creaking of wood, to the shifting of breath, to the echo of Kai's absence and his presence in everything. Marin eventually became the new steward of the conservatory. Under her care, it evolved. New chambers were built. A garden for sonic meditation bloomed. Digital instruments were introduced. Kai, though traditional, had always said, "Truth does not fear new tools." And the conservatory's motto was changed to a phrase found scribbled in the margins of one of Kai's notebooks. "Let the music of the world make you unfinished." Years later, travelers still visit the City of Echoes. Some come to play. Others come simply to be near the place where a man once asked a child to teach him something new. And every so often, on a quiet morning, a traveler will hear the sound of a strange wind moving through a gourd shell road, still hanging in the old chamber, still resonating with a note no one quite understands, a note that feels like a question. And if they listen closely, with open hands and an empty cup, they'll hear what Kai heard that very first day, the beginning of another wisdom quest. The next mountain, the next climb, the next becoming. Because the journey always continues.